Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Family Facade. David Finley stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his downtown law office, surveying the city skyline with the calculating gaze of a man who had built his reputation on never losing a case. At 38, he was one of the most feared criminal defense attorneys in the state, known for his ruthless tactics and unwavering dedication to protecting his clients, no matter how guilty they might be. David had grown up in a working-class family where his father, a police detective, had taught him that the world was divided into predators and prey. "Never let anyone see weakness, son," his father had always said. "The moment you show mercy is the moment they destroy you." Those lessons had served David well in his legal career, where he'd learned to exploit every loophole, manipulate every witness, and crush every opponent who stood between him and victory. His marriage to Christine Walls had seemed like the perfect complement to his success. Christine was beautiful, sophisticated, and came from a wealthy family that had provided valuable connections for David's practice. They'd met at a charity gala where Christine had been working as an event coordinator, her charm and social skills making her the ideal wife for an ambitious attorney. Their daughter Emma had been the final piece of their seemingly perfect life. At 6 years old, she was bright, curious, and completely devoted to her father. David's relationship with Emma was one of the few aspects of his life where his guard came down completely. He adored her unconditionally, and she represented everything pure and good in his otherwise cynical world. But David's keen instincts, honed by years of reading people in courtrooms, had begun to detect subtle changes in his family dynamic. Christine had grown distant over the past few months, making excuses to avoid family activities and spending increasing amounts of time working late on events that didn't seem to require her extended presence. More troubling was the behavior of Christine's mother, Diane Mann, a controlling woman in her 60s who had never approved of David's middle-class background. Diane had been making unusual comments about Emma's upbringing, suggesting that the child needed proper discipline and that David was too permissive as a father. "That girl is becoming spoiled," Diane had said during their last family dinner. "She needs to learn respect for authority before it's too late. In my day, children who misbehaved faced real consequences." David had dismissed these comments as typical grandmother complaints, but something in Diane's tone had set off alarm bells. His years of cross-examining hostile witnesses had taught him to recognize when someone was concealing their true motivations. The first concrete evidence of trouble came when David discovered that Christine had been making unexplained withdrawals from their joint savings account. When he confronted her about it, she claimed the money was for surprise anniversary gifts and charity donations, but her explanations were vague and inconsistent. David's investigative instincts kicked in, and he hired a private investigator, Eric Booth, a former police detective who specialized in domestic surveillance. Eric's initial report confirmed David's suspicions. Christine was having an affair with Clayton Lindsay, a real estate developer who was known for his predatory business practices and expensive lifestyle. Clayton Lindsay was everything David despised, a trust fund baby who had inherited his father's real estate empire and used his wealth to manipulate and corrupt everyone around him. He was married to a socialite named Bethany Skinner, but his reputation for infidelity was well known in their social circles. The affair had been going on for 6 months, with Christine and Clayton meeting at expensive hotels and private properties under the pretense of planning charity events. But what disturbed David most was the discovery that Diane Mann was not only aware of the affair, but actively facilitating it. Eric's surveillance revealed that Diane had been providing alibis for Christine, babysitting Emma during the affair meetings, and even helping to launder money from the joint account to fund Christine's expenses with Clayton. The three of them were working together in a conspiracy that went far beyond simple adultery. David's legal mind began analyzing the situation like a complex case. Christine's affair was just the surface level. There had to be a deeper motivation for Diane's involvement and the coordinated nature of their deception. In his experience, when multiple parties conspired in domestic betrayal, There was usually a financial motive hidden beneath the emotional drama. A breakthrough came when Eric discovered that Clayton Lindsay had been in financial trouble for the past year. His real estate empire was built on leveraged investments that had soured when interest rates rose, and he was facing potential bankruptcy unless he could secure significant capital quickly. David realized that Christine and her mother weren't just betraying his marriage. They were positioning themselves to steal his assets and destroy his family for Clayton's financial benefit. The affair was a means to an end, designed to create grounds for a divorce that would give Christine half of everything David had worked to build. But David Finley had spent his career destroying people who tried to manipulate the legal system for their own gain. He wasn't about to let his own family become victims of such a scheme, especially when it threatened his beloved daughter Emma. As David sat in his office that evening, reviewing Eric's surveillance reports and planning his response, he felt the cold fury that had made him legendary in courtrooms across the state. Christine, Clayton, and Diane had made the fatal mistake of underestimating him, assuming that his love for his family would make him vulnerable to their manipulation. They were about to learn that David Finley's protective instincts were far more dangerous than his professional reputation had ever suggested. The game was beginning, and David intended to win completely. Chapter 2. The Web of Deception. David spent the following weeks carefully documenting every aspect of Christine's betrayal while maintaining the facade of an unsuspecting husband. His legal training had taught him that the best cases were won through meticulous preparation and overwhelming evidence, and he applied those same principles to planning his response to his family's conspiracy. Eric Booth's investigation revealed the full scope of the plot against David's family. Christine had been systematically transferring money from their joint account to a private account that she shared with Diane Mann. The funds were being used not just to finance her affair with Clayton Lindsay, but to pay for legal consultations with divorce attorneys who specialized in asset seizure. The most damning discovery came when Eric obtained recordings of conversations between Christine and Diane, revealing their true motivations. They weren't just planning to divorce David and take half his assets. They were plotting to gain full custody of Emma and use her as leverage to extract even more money from David's successful law practice. David's too attached to that girl, Christine had said in one recorded conversation. He'll pay anything to keep seeing her. We can bleed him dry for years if we play this right. Diane's response had been even more calculating. The key is making him look like an unfit father. We need to document incidents that show he's unstable, violent, or neglectful. Then we can use Emma's well-being as justification for whatever we want. David listened to these recordings in his office late one night, his hands clenched into fists as he heard his wife and mother-in-law discussing his daughter like she was a commodity to be exploited. Emma was an innocent child who adored both her parents, and the idea of using her emotional well-being as a weapon in their scheme filled David with a rage he'd never experienced. But the recordings also revealed something else that concerned David deeply. Diane Mann's disturbing comments about disciplining Emma if she became a problem for their plans. Diane had a history of being controlling and manipulative, but her recent statements suggested she might be willing to harm Emma physically if the child interfered with their conspiracy. If that little brat starts asking too many questions or getting in the way, I'll handle her, Diane had said in one conversation. Children need to learn their place, and sometimes that requires harsh lessons. David's protective instincts went into overdrive. He'd always been suspicious of Diane's old-fashioned views on child discipline, but now he realized that his daughter might be in actual danger from her own grandmother. David began implementing a multi-layered strategy to protect Emma while gathering evidence against his conspirators. He installed hidden security cameras throughout their home, obtained court orders to monitor the financial accounts Christine thought were secret, and arranged for discreet surveillance of Diane's house, where Emma often stayed overnight. The security measures proved prescient when David discovered that Diane had been giving Emma inappropriate medications to make her more compliant during visits. The hidden cameras captured Diane forcing Emma to take pills that weren't prescribed by any doctor, then threatening the child with punishment if she told her parents about the special vitamins. David immediately took Emma to a pediatrician who confirmed that she had been given adult sleep medication and anxiety drugs that could have caused serious harm to a child her age. The doctor was required to report the suspected abuse to Child Protective Services, but David used his legal connections to ensure the investigation was handled discreetly while he gathered additional evidence. Meanwhile, David's investigation into Clayton Lindsay revealed vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Clayton's real estate empire was indeed on the verge of collapse, but he'd been hiding his financial problems from investors and creditors through fraudulent accounting practices. More importantly, Clayton had a history of violent behavior toward women that had been covered up by expensive lawyers and strategic settlements. David obtained police reports from 3 different incidents where Clayton had been arrested for domestic violence, only to have the charges dropped when his victims were pressured or paid to recant their statements. One of the victims, a former girlfriend named Amanda Ingram, had been hospitalized with severe injuries but had later claimed she'd fallen downstairs. David arranged a private meeting with Amanda Ingram, using his reputation as a skilled attorney to convince her to tell the truth about Clayton's violence. Amanda was initially reluctant, but David's promise of legal protection and his evidence of Clayton's ongoing financial crimes eventually persuaded her to cooperate. "Clayton is a monster," Amanda told David during their meeting. "He gets off on hurting women who can't fight back. When he gets angry, he becomes someone else entirely, someone who enjoys causing pain." Amanda's testimony provided David with crucial ammunition, but it also raised terrifying questions about Christine's safety and judgment. If Christine was involved with a man who had a history of violence against women, what did that mean for Emma's well-being when she was in their care? David's worst fears were realized when Eric's surveillance captured a disturbing incident at Diane's house. Emma had been staying overnight while Christine claimed to be at a charity event, but the hidden cameras David had placed revealed that Christine had actually been at Clayton's apartment. During the overnight stay, Diane had become increasingly agitated with Emma's questions about her mother's whereabouts. When Emma began crying and asking to call her father, Diane had grabbed the child roughly and forced her into a basement room, threatening to leave her there all night if she didn't stop crying. The footage was heartbreaking and infuriating. David watched his 6-year-old daughter being terrorized by her own grandmother, while Christine was betraying their family with a violent criminal. The basement room where Diane had confined Emma was dark, cold, and completely inappropriate for a child. David realized that his family's conspiracy had crossed the line for financial betrayal and child abuse. Emma was being used as a pawn in their scheme, and her physical and emotional safety was being sacrificed for their greed and selfishness. But David also recognized an opportunity. Diane's abusive behavior and Christine's neglect provided him with powerful evidence that could destroy their custody plans and expose their true motivations. If he played his cards correctly, he could not only protect Emma, but ensure that her abusers faced severe consequences for their actions. David began planning the final phase of his strategy, knowing that he would need to be patient and calculating to achieve the complete destruction of everyone who had threatened his daughter. Christine, Clayton, and Diane had made the mistake of targeting the one person in the world that David would kill to protect. They were about to learn that some fathers were far more dangerous than they appeared. Chapter 3. The Trap is Set. David's strategy entered its most critical phase as he prepared to expose his family's conspiracy while ensuring Emma's safety. He knew that confronting Christine and Diane directly would only drive them underground and potentially put Emma in greater danger. Instead, he decided to create a scenario that would force them to reveal their true nature while providing him with undeniable evidence of their crimes. The opportunity came when Christine suggested that she and David take a long-overdue vacation to repair their marriage. David recognized this as part of her plan to create an alibi for the next phase of their scheme, but he also saw it as the perfect trap. "We could go to that resort in the mountains you've always wanted to visit," Christine suggested one evening, her voice carrying the false sweetness David had learned to recognize. "Just the 2 of us for a week. My mother could watch Emma. She's always saying she doesn't get enough time with her granddaughter." David pretended to consider the suggestion, while internally calculating how to turn Christine's plan against her. "That sounds wonderful," he replied. "But are you sure your mother can handle Emma for a whole week? She's been complaining about her energy level lately." "Mother insists she can manage," Christine assured him. "She says Emma needs to learn more discipline anyway, and a week with her grandmother would be good for her character development." The phrase character development sent chills down David's spine, given what he'd observed about Diane's methods of discipline. But it also provided him with the opening he needed to implement his plan. David agreed to the vacation, but secretly arranged for enhanced surveillance of Diane's house and established emergency protocols with Eric Booth. He also prepared legal documents that would give him immediate custody of Emma if evidence of abuse was discovered, and he briefed his most trusted associates about the situation. Most importantly, David gave Emma a special phone, disguised as a toy, that would allow her to contact him directly if she felt unsafe. He taught her how to use it during a private father-daughter outing, explaining it as a secret game they could play while he was away. "If Grandma Diane makes you scared or uncomfortable, you can call Daddy with this special phone," David explained gently. "No matter what anyone tells you, Daddy will always come if you need help." Emma nodded solemnly, understanding that this was something important even if she didn't grasp the full implications. David's heart ached as he looked at his innocent daughter, knowing that he was deliberately placing her in a dangerous situation to expose the conspiracy against their family. The vacation began exactly as David had predicted. Christine was overly affectionate and attentive during their first 2 days at the resort, playing the role of the loving wife trying to save her marriage. But David noticed her checking her phone constantly and making excuses to take private calls from work. Eric's surveillance confirmed that Christine was coordinating with Clayton Lindsay, who had arrived in the same mountain town and was staying at a different hotel. They were planning to meet once Christine established her alibi of working on their marriage with David. Meanwhile, the cameras at Diane's house revealed increasingly disturbing behavior toward Emma. Diane had immediately begun implementing harsh discipline routines, forcing Emma to sit in uncomfortable positions for hours and threatening severe punishment for minor infractions. On the second night of the vacation, Diane's abuse escalated significantly. Emma had asked to call her parents, and Diane had responded by forcing the child into the basement and locking the door. The surveillance footage showed Emma crying and pleading to be let out, while Diane ignored her distress. David watched the live feed from his hotel room, his hands shaking with rage as he saw his daughter's terror. But he forced himself to wait, knowing that he needed more evidence to ensure Diane's complete destruction and to prove that Christine was complicit in the abuse. The breaking point came on the third day when Diane's behavior became genuinely dangerous. Emma had apparently tried to use the regular house phone to call her parents, and Diane had flown into a rage that was captured on multiple cameras. David watched in horror as Diane grabbed Emma roughly, dragging her to the basement and securing her wrists with zip ties to prevent her from escaping. The elderly woman then turned off the basement lights, leaving Emma alone in the dark while she returned upstairs to continue her daily routine. This wasn't discipline, it was torture. A 6-year-old child was being terrorized and physically restrained by her own grandmother, while her mother was betraying her family with a violent criminal. David's legal mind recognized that Diane's actions constituted multiple felonies, including child abuse, false imprisonment, and reckless endangerment. But what pushed David over the edge was Emma's desperate attempt to reach him using the special phone he'd given her. The child had managed to access the device despite her restraints, and David's phone buzzed with an incoming video call that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Emma's tear-streaked face appeared on his screen, her small voice breaking as she spoke the words that would trigger David's complete transformation from protective father to avenging angel. "Daddy, help me please," Emma cried, the camera showing the zip ties around her wrists and the dark basement where she was imprisoned. "Grandma Diane hurt me and won't let me go. I'm scared, Daddy. Please come home." David saw the bruises on his daughter's arms where Diane had grabbed her and the terror in Emma's eyes as she begged for rescue. In that moment, every civilized instinct David possessed was replaced by primal fury that demanded immediate and brutal justice. "I'm coming, sweetheart," David said, his voice calm despite the rage burning inside him. "Daddy's coming right now." and I'm going to make sure you're safe. Just hold on for me." David hung up and immediately called Eric Booth, his voice deadly cold as he issued instructions. "Get to Diane's house now. Emma is in immediate danger. Document everything, call the police, but don't intervene until I arrive. I want to handle this personally." David then turned to Christine, who was lounging by the pool completely unaware that her conspiracy was about to destroy her life. His expression must have been terrifying because her face went pale when she saw him approaching. "We're leaving," David announced. "Right now." "What's wrong?" Christine asked, her voice carrying a note of panic. "Did something happen?" David smiled, and it was the cold smile of a predator who had cornered his prey. "Yes, Christine, something happened. Your mother just made the biggest mistake of her life, and you're about to pay for it alongside her." As they rushed back toward the city, David's mind was already calculating the complete destruction of everyone who had threatened his daughter. Diane Mann would face criminal charges that would put her in prison for the rest of her life. Christine would lose everything in a divorce that would leave her destitute and publicly humiliated. Clayton Lindsay would discover that his violent past had finally caught up with him in ways he never imagined. But first, David had a basement door to open and a daughter to rescue. And when he found what waited for him there, the evidence would be so overwhelming that even the most corrupt judge would have no choice but to deliver justice. The drive home was the longest 2 hours of David's life, but it was also the time when he transformed from a man seeking justice into something far more dangerous. By the time he reached Diane's house, David Finley, the protective father, had become David Finley, the destroyer of lives. Chapter 4. The Moment of Truth. David's car screeched to a halt outside Diane Mann's house at 3 in the morning, his hands still trembling from the image of his daughter's terrified face on the video call. Eric Booth was waiting in the shadows, his expression grim as he briefed David on what the surveillance had captured during the drive home. "It's worse than we thought," Eric reported quietly. "Diane has Emma restrained in the basement, and she's been down there for over 6 hours. The child is clearly in distress, and Diane has shown no intention of checking on her welfare." David's jaw clenched as he absorbed this information. 6 hours of terror for a 6-year-old child, while her grandmother continued her normal evening routine upstairs as if nothing was happening. The calculated cruelty of it was beyond comprehension. "Where's Christine?" David asked, his voice deadly calm. "Still on her way back. She's been calling and texting frantically since you left the resort, but Diane isn't answering. She knows something's wrong." David nodded grimly. Christine's panic was confirmation that she knew about her mother's abuse and had been counting on the vacation to provide her with plausible deniability. But her frantic attempts to contact Diane proved that she was complicit in the conspiracy to harm Emma. "Have you called the police?" David asked. "They're en route, but I wanted you here first. You need to see this with your own eyes, and we need to document your initial reaction for the custody case." David understood. His response to discovering Emma's abuse would be crucial evidence in the legal battles that would follow. But more importantly, he needed to rescue his daughter immediately and ensure that the evidence against Diane was absolutely overwhelming. David approached the front door of Diane's house, noting that all the lights were off except for a single lamp in the living room. The house appeared normal from the outside, but David knew that his daughter was suffering in the basement below. Using the key Diane had given him years ago for emergencies, David entered the house quietly. The living room showed signs of Diane's normal evening routine. A cup of tea on the coffee table, the television still playing a late-night talk show, and a book open beside her reading chair. The normalcy of the scene made David's rage burn even hotter. Diane had tortured his daughter for hours, then settled down for a peaceful evening of television and reading as if nothing had happened. The woman was either completely psychotic or so consumed with spite that she no longer recognized Emma as a human being worthy of basic compassion. David made his way toward the basement door, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. Behind him, he could hear Eric documenting everything with a camera, ensuring that every moment of the rescue would be preserved for the criminal prosecution that would follow. The basement door was locked, and David could hear faint sounds from below, his daughter's quiet sobs and occasional calls for help that grew weaker as her voice gave out from hours of crying. The sound of Emma's distress triggered something primal in David's chest, a fury so complete that his vision actually narrowed as adrenaline flooded his system. David forced the basement door open, the lock splintering under the pressure of his rage-fueled strength. As he descended the stairs, the full scope of Diane's cruelty became visible, and what he found there made him call the police with trembling hands, not from fear, but from barely controlled homicidal rage. Emma was chained to a metal post in the center of the basement, her small wrists secured with zip ties that had cut into her skin from her struggles to escape. She was sitting on the cold concrete floor in her pajamas, shivering from the basement's temperature and trauma from hours of abandonment. But the physical restraints weren't the worst of it. Diane had deliberately placed Emma in a position where she could see a collection of disturbing items arranged on a nearby table. Restraints, disciplinary tools, and photographs of other children who appeared to have been subjected to similar treatment. David realized with sickening clarity that this wasn't Diane's first time abusing a child. The basement had been prepared specifically for this purpose, with hooks in the ceiling, restraint points along the walls, and a collection of implements designed to terrorize and control children. Emma looked up when she heard David's footsteps, her face lighting up with desperate relief, even as tears continued streaming down her cheeks. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "You came. Grandma Diane said you wouldn't come, that nobody would believe me if I told." David knelt beside his daughter, his hands shaking as he carefully cut the zip ties that had bound her wrists. The marks on her skin would serve as evidence. But more importantly, Emma was alive and would recover from this trauma with proper care and support. "I'm here, sweetheart," David said gently, lifting Emma into his arms and carrying her away from the horrific scene. "Daddy's here, and you're safe now. Grandma Diane will never hurt you again." As David carried Emma upstairs, Eric continued documenting the basement chamber and its contents. The evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't a case of discipline gone too far, but a deliberate torture chamber designed specifically for child abuse. David called 911 from the living room, his voice steady despite the fury burning in his chest. "This is David Finley. I need police and emergency medical services at 247 Maple Street immediately. I've just discovered that my 6-year-old daughter has been physically abused and falsely imprisoned by my mother-in-law. The child needs medical attention, and the perpetrator needs to be arrested." The dispatcher's questions were routine, but David's answers painted a picture of systematic child abuse that would trigger a major investigation. Emma was taken to the hospital for evaluation and treatment, while police secured the scene and began collecting evidence. Diane Mann was arrested at her Bridge Club 2 hours later, her shocked protests that she'd done nothing wrong falling on deaf ears, as the evidence of her crimes was already documented and photographed. The woman who had tortured David's daughter spent her first night in jail, and it would be far from her last. But David's fury wasn't satisfied by Diane's arrest. Christine had been complicit in placing Emma in danger, and Clayton Lindsay had been the financial motivation behind the entire conspiracy. Both of them would face consequences that would destroy their lives as completely as they had tried to destroy David's family. The police investigation revealed that Diane's basement chamber had been used multiple times over the years, with evidence suggesting that she had abused other children in her care. Her arrest triggered a broader investigation that would eventually expose a network of child abuse that had been covered up by wealthy families who valued their reputations more than children's safety. As David sat beside Emma's hospital bed, watching his daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in days, he made a silent vow that would guide his actions for the rest of his life. Everyone who had participated in harming his daughter would face justice, and that justice would be swift, complete, and utterly merciless. Diane Mann, Christine Walls, and Clayton Lindsay had made the fatal mistake of targeting the one person in the world that David would kill to protect. Now, they would learn that some fathers were far more dangerous than they appeared, and some betrayals carried consequences that lasted forever. Chapter 5: The Unraveling. The hospital room where Emma recovered became David's war room as he coordinated the systematic destruction of everyone who had conspired against his family. While his daughter slept under medical supervision, David worked with a team of investigators, prosecutors, and legal experts to ensure that justice would be swift and absolute. Emma's medical examination had revealed the full extent of Diane's abuse. Beyond the physical injuries from the restraints, Emma showed signs of psychological trauma consistent with prolonged emotional abuse. The pediatric psychologist who evaluated her reported that Emma had been systematically terrorized and threatened with escalating violence if she revealed what had happened to her. "Your daughter is remarkably resilient," Dr. and Rutherford told David during a private consultation. "But the abuse she suffered was calculated and deliberate. This wasn't a case of discipline gone too far. It was systematic torture designed to break a child's spirit and establish complete control over her." David absorbed this information with cold fury, knowing that every detail would be crucial for the criminal prosecution that would follow. But he also recognized that the legal system, despite its eventual justice, would be too slow and too limited to provide the complete accountability he demanded. Christine arrived at the hospital 6 hours after David's discovery, her face a mask of false concern and barely concealed panic. She'd driven straight from the mountains, but David's private investigators had tracked her movements and confirmed that she'd made multiple stops to meet with lawyers and contact Clayton Lindsay. "Oh my God, David," Christine said as she entered Emma's room. "What happened? Is she okay? I came as soon as I got your message." David studied his wife's performance, noting the calculated nature of her concern and the way her eyes avoided meeting his directly. "Diane abused her, Christine. She chained our daughter in her basement and tortured her for hours while we were away." Christine's reaction was telling. Instead of shock or outrage, her first response was to minimize the situation and deflect blame. "That can't be right," Christine protested. "Mother would never hurt Emma. There must be some misunderstanding. Maybe Emma got confused, or maybe she's exaggerating because she missed us." David's jaw clenched as he heard his wife suggest that their traumatized daughter was lying about being abused. "The police have photographs, Christine. There's video evidence." Diane restrained Emma with zip ties and left her chained in a basement for 6 hours. Christine's face went pale as she realized the implications. If there was video evidence, then the abuse was undeniable, and her own complicity in placing Emma in danger would be exposed. "I had no idea," Christine said quickly. "If I'd known Mother was capable of something like this, I never would have left Emma with her. This is as much a shock to me as it is to you." David smiled coldly. "Is it, Christine? Because I have recordings of you and your mother discussing Emma's discipline and how she needed to learn her place. I also have evidence of your affair with Clayton Lindsay and your plan to use Emma as leverage in a custody battle." The color drained from Christine's face completely as she realized that David knew about the conspiracy. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been protecting my family," David corrected. "And it's a good thing I was, because your mother nearly killed our daughter while you were planning to betray our marriage." Christine's mask of concern finally slipped, revealing the calculating manipulator underneath. "You can't prove I knew what Mother was planning. Even if I was having an affair, that doesn't make me responsible for her actions." "Actually, it does," David replied. "Because you knew about Diane's history of abusive behavior, and you deliberately placed Emma in her care so you could establish an alibi for your infidelity. That makes you legally responsible for child endangerment and conspiracy to commit abuse." Christine's panic was now visible as she realized the full scope of her legal jeopardy. "David, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but I never wanted Emma to get hurt. If you'll forgive me, we can rebuild our marriage and put this behind us." David's laugh was devoid of warmth. "Forgive you? Christine, you conspired with your mother to abuse our daughter and with your lover to steal our assets. Some things are unforgivable, and this is one of them." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Detective Willard McCall, the lead investigator on Diane's case. Detective McCall was a veteran officer who specialized in child abuse cases, and his expression was grim as he briefed David on the investigation's progress. We've executed search warrants on Diane Mann's property and found extensive evidence of systematic child abuse, Detective McCall reported. The basement chamber was equipped for restraining and terrorizing children, and we found photographs and videos that suggest multiple victims over several years. David's fury intensified as he learned that Emma wasn't Diane's first victim. How many children? We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests at least 6 children over the past decade, all from wealthy families, all abused under the guise of discipline or character building. Christine gasped audibly, either from genuine shock or from realization that her mother's crimes were far worse than she'd imagined. I had no idea Mother was doing anything like this to other children. Detective McCall studied Christine carefully. Mrs. Finley, we need to ask you some questions about your knowledge of your mother's activities. We found evidence that suggests family members were aware of the abuse and may have been complicit in covering it up. Christine's panic escalated as she realized that she was now a target of the criminal investigation. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying anything else without legal representation. David watched with satisfaction as his wife demanded legal protection, knowing that her guilty conscience was already revealing her complicity. An innocent person would have cooperated fully with the investigation to help protect other children, but Christine's first instinct was to protect herself. As Christine was escorted from the hospital by police for formal questioning, David turned his attention to the next phase of his plan. Diane's arrest and Christine's complicity were just the beginning. Clayton Lindsay still needed to face consequences for his role in the conspiracy that had endangered Emma's life. David's investigation into Clayton's affairs had revealed that the man's financial desperation was even worse than initially suspected. Clayton had been using fraudulent investment schemes to steal money from his clients, including several elderly victims who had lost their life savings to his manipulations. But more importantly for David's purposes, Clayton's history of violence against women provided opportunities for creative justice that the legal system might not deliver. Amanda Ingram's testimony about Clayton's abusive behavior was just one piece of a larger pattern that David intended to expose in the most public and humiliating way possible. David made a series of phone calls from Emma's hospital room, coordinating with prosecutors, private investigators, and media contacts to ensure that Clayton Lindsay's destruction would be complete and permanent. The man who had conspired to steal David's assets and endangered his daughter's life was about to discover that some enemies were too dangerous to make. As Emma began to wake up from her peaceful sleep, David sat beside her bed and took her small hand in his. His daughter would recover from this trauma, but the people who had caused it would never recover from what David was about to do to them. The game was entering its final phase, and David intended to win completely. Chapter 6: The Network of Corruption. As Emma's condition stabilized and she began the long process of psychological recovery, David's investigation into the conspiracy against his family revealed a web of corruption that extended far beyond his personal betrayal. The basement chamber in Diane's house was just one piece of a larger network of wealthy families who had been covering up child abuse for years. Detective McCall's investigation had uncovered evidence that Diane Mann was part of an informal network of wealthy grandparents and caregivers who used systematic abuse to discipline children from prominent families. The abuse was always framed as character building or traditional values, but the reality was calculated torture designed to create compliant, traumatized children who wouldn't question adult authority. We've identified at least 12 families that were connected to this network, Detective McCall informed David during a private briefing. The children were abused by various caregivers, but the families covered it up to protect their social reputations. Your mother-in-law was one of the worst offenders, but she wasn't acting alone. David absorbed this information with growing fury. Emma's abuse wasn't an isolated incident of a grandmother's excessive discipline. It was part of a systematic network of child torture that had been protected by wealthy families who valued their social standing more than children's welfare. What's being done about the other families? David asked. That's where it gets complicated, Detective McCall admitted. Most of the children are now adults, and many of them have been too traumatized or intimidated to come forward. The families involved have significant political and financial influence, so the investigation has to be handled carefully. David's legal mind immediately recognized the challenge. Prosecuting wealthy, influential families for decades-old child abuse would require overwhelming evidence and ironclad cases that couldn't be dismissed or covered up through political pressure. "I want to help," David said firmly. "Whatever resources you need, whatever legal support is required, I'll provide it." These people destroyed children's lives to protect their reputations, and they need to face consequences. Detective McCall nodded gratefully. "We were hoping you'd say that. Your legal expertise and your personal motivation could be crucial for building cases that will actually result in convictions." David's decision to support the broader investigation wasn't just about justice for other victims. It was also strategic. By positioning himself as a crusader against child abuse, he would gain public sympathy and moral authority that would be crucial for destroying Christine and Clayton's reputations. Meanwhile, David's private investigation into Clayton Lindsay had revealed connections to the child abuse network that went beyond his relationship with Christine. Clayton's real estate empire had been used to facilitate the abuse network by providing private properties where children could be taken for discipline away from their family homes. Eric Booth's investigation discovered that Clayton owned several remote properties that had been equipped specifically for restraining and terrorizing children. The properties were marketed as therapeutic retreat centers for troubled youth, but the reality was far more sinister. Clayton's been renting these properties to wealthy families who wanted to have their children corrected without leaving evidence in their own homes, Eric reported. "We've found restraint equipment, surveillance cameras, and documentation of at least 20 children who were taken to these facilities over the past 5 years." David's fury reached new heights as he realized that Clayton Lindsay wasn't just a financial manipulator and domestic abuser. He was a facilitator of systematic child torture who had profited from the suffering of dozens of children. "We need to coordinate with Detective McCall immediately," David instructed. "This evidence could be crucial for the broader investigation, and I want Clayton's role in the network fully exposed." The coordination between David's private investigation and the police investigation created a powerful alliance that the child abuse network couldn't withstand. David's legal expertise helped prosecutors build stronger cases, while his financial resources allowed for investigations that might otherwise have been limited by budget constraints. But David's most effective weapon was his growing media campaign to expose the network of corruption. Using his connections in the legal community and his reputation as a successful attorney, David began granting interviews and providing information to journalists who specialized in investigative reporting. The story that emerged was shocking even by the standards of wealthy family scandals. A network of prominent families had been systematically abusing their children and grandchildren for decades, using private facilities and complicit caregivers to torture children into complete submission. The media coverage created a public outcry that made it impossible for the wealthy families to cover up their crimes through political influence. Parents of the abused children began coming forward, and survivors found the courage to testify about their experiences. Christine's role in the conspiracy became a focal point of the media coverage, partly because of David's strategic leaks, but also because her case was the most recent and well-documented. The woman who had betrayed her husband and endangered her daughter became the public face of parental complicity in child abuse. Christine Finley knew her mother had a history of abusive behavior toward children, David told a television reporter during a carefully staged interview. "She deliberately placed our 6-year-old daughter in her mother's care so she could establish an alibi for her affair with a man who facilitated child abuse through his real estate properties. That's not just marital betrayal. That's criminal conspiracy to endanger a child." The interview was broadcast during prime time, and Christine's reputation was destroyed overnight. Her social circle abandoned her. Her professional contacts refused to work with her, and her own family began to distance themselves from the scandal. Clayton Lindsay's destruction was even more complete. The revelation that his real estate empire had been used to facilitate child abuse triggered a federal investigation that uncovered massive financial fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering charges. His marriage to Bethany Skinner ended in a divorce that left him financially ruined, and his business empire collapsed under the weight of criminal investigations and civil lawsuits. But David's most satisfying victory came when Clayton attempted to flee the country to avoid prosecution. David had anticipated this move and had been working with federal authorities to monitor Clayton's activities. When Clayton tried to board a private jet to a non-extradition country, he was arrested at the airport on federal charges that would put him in prison for the rest of his life. As David watched the news coverage of Clayton's arrest, he felt a grim satisfaction that justice was finally being served. The man who had conspired to steal his assets and facilitated the abuse of his daughter was now facing a life sentence in federal prison, where his history of violence against women and children would make him a target for other inmates. But David's revenge wasn't complete yet. Christine still needed to face the full consequences of her betrayal, and David intended to ensure that her punishment was as complete and permanent as possible. The final phase of David's plan was about to begin. It would demonstrate that some fathers were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Chapter 7. The Courtroom Crucifixion. 6 months after Emma's rescue from Diane's basement, David stood in the courthouse where he had won countless cases for other clients. But this time he was fighting for his daughter's future and his family's justice. The criminal trial of Diane Mann had become a media sensation, with David serving as both a victim's advocate and a star witness in the prosecution's case. Emma had made remarkable progress in her recovery, thanks to intensive therapy and David's unwavering support. Dr. and Rutherford reported that while Emma would need ongoing psychological care, she was demonstrating the resilience of a child who knew she was protected and loved by her father. Emma understands that what happened to her was wrong, and she knows that her father will never let anyone hurt her again, Dr. Rutherford told the court during her testimony. That sense of security is crucial for her continued healing. David had insisted on testifying personally about discovering Emma in Diane's basement, despite his lawyer's concerns that his emotional testimony might be too intense for the jury. But David's rage had been channeled into a cold, prosecutorial presentation that was far more effective than any emotional outburst. When I opened that basement door and saw my 6-year-old daughter chained to a metal post, with marks on her wrist from struggling to escape, I realized that Diane Mann wasn't just an abusive grandmother, David testified. She was a predator who had systematically tortured my child for her own psychological gratification. The jury's reaction to David's testimony was visible shock and outrage. Several jurors were crying as David described finding Emma in the basement chamber, and their expressions toward Diane Mann ranged from disgust to barely controlled anger. Diane's defense attorney, Harold Douglas, attempted to portray the abuse as excessive discipline rather than criminal torture, but the evidence was overwhelming. The basement chamber, the restraint equipment, the photographs of other victims, and the video evidence of Diane's systematic cruelty painted a picture of calculated child abuse that no jury could ignore. The most damaging testimony came from other victims who had finally found the courage to come forward. Amanda Ingram testified about being abused by Diane as a child, describing years of torture that had been covered up by her wealthy family to avoid scandal. Diane Mann destroyed my childhood and traumatized me in ways that I'm still dealing with 30 years later, Amanda told the court. She convinced my parents that the abuse was necessary discipline, and they allowed it to continue because they valued their social reputation more than my well-being. The pattern of abuse was undeniable, and the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Diane Mann was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, ensuring that she would die behind bars for her crimes against children. But Diane's conviction was just the beginning of David's campaign for complete justice. Christine's criminal trial for child endangerment and conspiracy was scheduled for the following month, and David had been working with prosecutors to ensure that her punishment would be severe and permanent. Christine's defense strategy was predictable. She claimed to be another victim of her mother's manipulation, insisting that she had no knowledge of Diane's abusive behavior and that her affair with Clayton Lindsay was a separate issue from her daughter's abuse. My client was deceived by her mother just as much as anyone else, Christine's attorney, Roman Stout, argued during opening statements. She trusted her mother to care for her daughter, and that trust was betrayed. While her marital infidelity was wrong, it doesn't make her criminally responsible for her mother's independent actions. David knew this defense strategy was coming, which was why he had spent months gathering evidence that proved Christine's knowledge of and complicity in Diane's abusive behavior. The recordings of Christine and Diane discussing Emma's discipline were devastating, but David had also uncovered evidence that Christine had witnessed Diane's abuse of other children and had chosen to ignore it. Eric Booth's investigation had revealed that Christine had been present during several incidents where Diane had abused children at family gatherings. Other family members testified that Christine had seen Diane dragging crying children to isolated rooms and had heard the children's screams, but had never intervened or reported the abuse. Christine Finley wasn't just complicit in her mother's abuse of her own daughter, the prosecutor argued. She was complicit in a pattern of child abuse that spanned decades. She knew what her mother was capable of, and she deliberately placed her daughter in danger to facilitate her own selfish plans. The evidence of Christine's complicity was overwhelming. Phone records showed that she had been coordinating with Diane about Emma's discipline while simultaneously planning her affair with Clayton Lindsay. Financial records proved that Christine had been funding Clayton's real estate properties that were used for child abuse, making her a financial participant in the conspiracy. Most damaging of all were the recordings of Christine dismissing Emma's previous complaints about Diane's treatment. Emma had tried to tell her mother about being hurt by her grandmother, but Christine had told her daughter to stop exaggerating and show more respect for your elders. David testified about these incidents with cold fury, describing how Christine had ignored their daughter's pleas for protection while simultaneously planning to use Emma as leverage in their divorce proceedings. Christine knew that her mother was abusing our daughter, and she chose to ignore it because the abuse served her purposes, David told the jury. She wanted Emma to be compliant and traumatized so she could claim that I was an unfit father. She sacrificed our daughter's well-being for her own financial gain. The jury's reaction to Christine was even more hostile than their response to Diane. Where Diane was seen as a mentally ill predator, Christine was viewed as a mother who had betrayed her most fundamental duty to protect her child. Christine's conviction on all charges was swift and decisive. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison for child endangerment, conspiracy to commit abuse, and financial fraud related to her participation in Clayton's schemes. But David's most satisfying moment came during the victim impact statement phase of sentencing, when he was allowed to address Christine directly about the consequences of her betrayal. You were Emma's mother, and you chose to sacrifice her safety for your own selfish desires, David said, his voice steady and cold as he stared at his ex-wife. You conspired with a child abuser and a violent criminal to destroy our family, and you used our daughter as a weapon in your scheme. For that betrayal, there can never be forgiveness. Christine broke down, crying as David spoke, but her tears only reinforced the jury's perception that she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. David felt no sympathy for her suffering. She had made her choices, and now she would live with them for the rest of her life. The final piece of David's legal victory came when Clayton Lindsay's federal trial resulted in convictions for racketeering, child endangerment, financial fraud, and conspiracy charges. Clayton was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again be able to harm women or children. As David left the courthouse after Clayton's sentencing, he reflected on the complete nature of his victory. Diane Mann would die in prison. Christine would serve 15 years and emerge as a registered child abuser with no prospects for rebuilding her life, and Clayton Lindsay would spend the rest of his life in federal custody. But more importantly, the child abuse network that had terrorized wealthy families for decades had been exposed and destroyed. Dozens of families were facing criminal charges, and the survivors were finally receiving justice and support for their trauma. David had protected his daughter, destroyed his enemies, and dismantled a network of corruption that had hurt countless children. The victory was complete, but David knew that his work wasn't finished yet. Emma still needed her father's protection and support, as she continued to heal from her trauma. And David had learned that the world was full of predators who would target the innocent if good people didn't have the courage to stop them. David Finley had discovered that he was capable of being far more dangerous than anyone had imagined when it came to protecting what mattered most to him. And he was prepared to use that capacity whenever necessary to ensure that Emma would never again face the kind of evil that had nearly destroyed her childhood. Chapter 8. The Price of Justice. 2 years after the trials that had destroyed David's enemies, he stood in the living room of his new home, watching Emma play with her friends in the backyard through the large windows that provided clear sight lines to every corner of their property. The house was smaller than their previous family home, but it was designed with security and Emma's safety as the primary considerations. Emma had made remarkable progress in her recovery, though the trauma of her abuse would always be part of her story. She was 8 years old now, bright and curious, but with an awareness of adult cruelty that no child should possess. David had ensured she received the best possible therapy and support, and she was surrounded by people who understood her needs and protected her well-being. Dr. in Rutherford continued to work with Emma regularly, and her latest evaluation showed that Emma was developing healthy coping mechanisms and maintaining appropriate relationships with other children and trusted adults. Emma has processed her trauma in remarkable ways, Dr. Rutherford told David during their monthly consultation. She understands that what happened to her was wrong, that it wasn't her fault, and that she's now safe. Most importantly, she maintains complete trust in you as her protector. David felt pride in his daughter's resilience, but he also remained vigilant about potential threats to her safety. The media coverage of the child abuse network trials had made their family a target for both supporters and critics, and David had implemented comprehensive security measures to protect Emma from unwanted attention. The house was equipped with state-of-the-art security systems, and David had hired a team of private security specialists to monitor their daily activities. Emma's school had been briefed about potential threats, and only pre-approved individuals were allowed to have contact with her during school hours. David's legal practice had evolved significantly since the trials. He had become one of the state's leading advocates for child abuse victims, using his experience and expertise to help other families navigate the legal system when their children were harmed. The Samuel Finley Foundation, named in honor of David's father's memory and his commitment to protecting the innocent, provided legal representation and support services for families who couldn't afford private attorneys. But David's most important work remained focused on Emma's continued recovery and development. He had restructured his law practice to allow for maximum flexibility in his schedule, ensuring that he could be present for every important moment in Emma's life. The afternoon ritual of homework and playtime in their backyard had become a symbol of the normal childhood David was determined to provide for his daughter. Emma was laughing with her friends, showing no signs of the trauma that had nearly destroyed her life, and David felt a sense of accomplishment that was far more meaningful than any legal victory. David's phone buzzed with a call from Detective McCall, who had become a close ally in the ongoing investigations related to the child abuse network. The detective's cases had resulted in over 30 convictions and had exposed corruption in multiple wealthy families across the region. "David, I wanted to update you on the appeals process," Detective McCall reported. "Diane Mann's appeal was denied by the state Supreme Court. She'll die in prison, as she deserves. Christine's appeal is still pending, but her lawyers aren't optimistic." David nodded with satisfaction. The appeals process had been lengthy and expensive for his enemies, draining their remaining resources while providing no relief from their convictions. Diane Mann was already showing signs of declining health in prison, and Christine had become a pariah among other inmates due to her conviction for child abuse. "What about Clayton Lindsay?" David asked. His federal appeals were exhausted last month. 40 years without parole, and he's been having a difficult time in federal custody. Word is that other inmates don't appreciate child abusers, and Clayton's reputation for violence against women has made him a target. David felt no sympathy for Clayton's suffering in prison. The man had facilitated the abuse of dozens of children and had conspired to steal David's assets while endangering Emma's life. Whatever consequences Clayton faced in federal custody with a natural result of his own actions. The conversation was interrupted by Emma running into the house, her face bright with excitement from playing with her friends. "Daddy, can Sarah and Jessica stay for dinner?" Emma asked. "We're building a fort in my room, and we're not finished yet." David smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm, grateful for every moment of normal childhood joy she experienced. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll call their parents and make sure it's okay with them." As David arranged the dinner plans, he reflected on how completely his life had changed since discovering Emma's abuse. The man who had once focused primarily on winning legal cases and building professional success had been transformed into someone whose entire existence revolved around protecting and nurturing his daughter. But David didn't regret the transformation. His legal career remained successful, but it was now focused on meaningful work that helped other families rather than just generating income. His personal life was simpler but more fulfilling, built around the relationships and values that truly mattered. Most importantly, David had learned that he was capable of far more than he had ever imagined when it came to protecting the people he loved. The systematic destruction of everyone who had threatened Emma had required patience, strategic thinking, and absolute ruthlessness, but David had never hesitated to do whatever was necessary to ensure his daughter's safety. That evening, as David tucked Emma into bed after her friends had gone home, she asked him a question that demonstrated her continued processing of her trauma. "Daddy, do you think Grandma Diane is sorry for what she did to me?" David considered his answer carefully, knowing that Emma needed honesty balanced with age-appropriate explanations. "I think Grandma Diane is probably sorry that she got caught and has to face consequences," David said. "But I don't think she's sorry for hurting you, because people who hurt children usually can't understand that what they're doing is wrong." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad she can't hurt other kids anymore. So, my sweetheart, and I want you to know that no one will ever hurt you again. Daddy will always protect you, no matter what." Emma smiled and hugged her father tightly. "I know, Daddy. I'm not scared anymore because you're here." As David turned off the lights in Emma's room and settled into his own evening routine, he reflected on the complete nature of his victory over the enemies who had threatened his family. Diane Mann would die in prison. Christine would remain incarcerated for over a decade more, and Clayton Lindsay would never again be free to harm women or children. But more importantly, the child abuse network that had operated in wealthy families for decades had been completely dismantled. Dozens of perpetrators were facing justice. Survivors were receiving support and treatment, and new protective measures had been implemented to prevent similar abuse in the future. David had achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish. Emma was safe, his enemies were destroyed, and the system that had failed to protect children had been reformed through his efforts and those of his allies. The price of that justice had been the complete transformation of David's life and priorities, but he considered it a price worth paying. He had learned that some things were worth any sacrifice to protect, and that some enemies deserved complete and permanent destruction. As David prepared for sleep in his secure home, with his daughter safe in her room and his enemies neutralized forever, he felt the satisfaction of a man who had faced the worst kind of evil and emerged victorious through superior preparation, strategic thinking, and absolute determination. The game was over, justice had been served, and David Finley had proven that some fathers were far more dangerous than anyone could imagine when their children were threatened. Chapter 9. Legacy of Protection. 5 years had passed since the basement door had opened to reveal David's worst nightmare, and now he stood in the conference room of the Samuel Finley Foundation, reviewing the annual report that showed their organization had helped over 500 families navigate the aftermath of child abuse. Emma, now 11 years old, sat beside him, having insisted on participating in the foundation's work despite her young age. "Daddy, Mrs. Rodriguez called to thank us for helping her daughter," Emma reported, reading from a folder of thank you letters. "She said the lawyers we provided helped her family get justice when the police wouldn't believe them." David smiled with pride at his daughter's involvement in their mission. Emma had become an advocate for other children who had suffered abuse, using her own experience to help families understand that recovery was possible and that justice could be achieved. Emma's recovery had exceeded everyone's expectations. While she would always carry the memories of her trauma, she had developed into a confident, compassionate young girl who understood the importance of protecting others from harm. Her weekly therapy sessions with Dr. and Rutherford had evolved into monthly check-ins, and her psychological evaluations consistently showed healthy development and strong coping skills. "Emma, you've become quite the advocate for children's rights," Dr. Rutherford had observed during their most recent session. "You've taken your painful experience and transformed it into a source of strength that helps other families. That's remarkable maturity for someone your age." David agreed, though he remained vigilant about ensuring that Emma's advocacy work didn't interfere with her normal childhood development. She attended regular school, participated in age-appropriate activities, and maintained friendships with children who understood her need for security but didn't treat her differently because of her past. The Foundation's work had expanded far beyond David's original vision. What had started as a response to Emma's abuse had grown into a comprehensive organization that provided legal representation, therapeutic services, and family support for child abuse victims across multiple states. Detective McCall had joined the Foundation as Director of Investigations, using his law enforcement experience to help families navigate the criminal justice system. The detective's cases continued to result in convictions and systemic reforms that protected other children from similar abuse. "We've identified and prosecuted over 60 perpetrators in the past 5 years," Detective McCall reported during the Foundation's board meeting. "But more importantly, we've changed how law enforcement and social services respond to reports of child abuse in wealthy families. The old system of covering up abuse to protect reputations has been largely dismantled." David nodded with satisfaction. The network of corruption that had protected child abusers for decades had been replaced with a system that prioritized children's safety over family reputation and social standing. The most meaningful aspect of the Foundation's work was the support it provided to survivors of the original abuse network. Amanda Ingram had become a spokesperson for the organization, using her recovery journey to encourage other survivors to seek help and pursue justice. "David's courage in exposing this network saved my life," Amanda told a television reporter during a recent interview. "I've been carrying the trauma of my childhood abuse for 30 years, convinced that no one would believe me or care about what happened. But the Foundation showed me that justice was possible and that my story mattered." David's legal practice had evolved to focus exclusively on child protection cases, making him one of the most respected advocates in the field. His reputation for ruthless efficiency in destroying child abusers had made him a feared opponent among defense attorneys who represented perpetrators. But David's most important role remained being Emma's father. He had restructured his entire life around her needs and development, ensuring that she would grow up feeling safe, protected, and empowered to protect others. The evening routine of homework, dinner, and family time had become the foundation of their relationship. Emma was an excellent student who excelled in academics and extracurricular activities, but David made sure that her achievements were balanced with relaxation and play. "Daddy, my teacher wants me to write an essay about someone who inspires me," Emma said during dinner that evening. "Can I write about you?" David smiled, touched by his daughter's admiration, but concerned about drawing too much attention to their family story. "What would you write about, sweetheart?" "About how you saved me from Grandma Diane and helped other kids who were hurt like I was," Emma replied. "I want to write about how fathers should protect their children and never let bad people hurt them." David considered this request carefully. Emma's essay would likely attract attention at school and possibly in the media, but it would also demonstrate the healthy way she had processed her trauma and transformed it into a source of strength. "You can write about protection and advocacy," David agreed. "But remember that our work is about helping families, not about making ourselves famous. The important thing is that children are safe, not that people know our names." Emma nodded seriously, understanding the distinction between meaningful advocacy and self-promotion. "I just want other kids to know that their daddy should fight for them if someone tries to hurt them." That evening, as David reviewed the Foundation's latest cases while Emma worked on her essay, he reflected on the complete transformation of their lives since the night he had received her desperate video call from Diane's basement. The enemies who had threatened his family were gone forever. Diane Mann had died in prison the previous year, her health destroyed by the stress of incarceration and the hatred of other inmates who despised child abusers. Christine remained in prison, with 8 more years to serve on her sentence, and would emerge as a registered sex offender with no prospects for rebuilding her life. Clayton Lindsay continued to serve his federal sentence, and reports from the prison suggested that his history of violence against women and children had made him a target for other inmates. But more importantly, the system that had allowed such abuse to continue had been dismantled and replaced with protections that prioritized children's safety over adult convenience or social status. David's phone buzzed with a text message from Eric Booth, who continued to provide security consulting for the foundation and other high-profile child protection cases. Saw the news about the Peterson family arrest. Another network exposed thanks to the protocols we developed. 37 children rescued. David smiled with satisfaction. The investigative techniques and legal strategies they had developed during Emma's case were being used to protect children across the country, creating a lasting legacy that would prevent abuse for generations to come. As David tucked Emma into bed that night, she showed him the draft of her essay about protection and advocacy. The writing was sophisticated for an 11-year-old, but more importantly, it demonstrated Emma's understanding that her trauma had been transformed into a source of strength that could help others. Some people think children can't protect themselves from bad adults, Emma had written, but they're wrong. Children can tell the truth about what happened to them, and they can help other children by sharing their stories. My daddy taught me that survivors can become protectors, and protectors never give up on helping people who need them. David felt pride in his daughter's wisdom and resilience, but also a renewed commitment to ensuring that she would never again face the kind of evil that had nearly destroyed her childhood. "I'm proud of you, Emma," David said as he kissed her goodnight. "You've become exactly the kind of person the world needs, someone who uses their strength to protect others." Emma smiled and hugged her father tightly. "I learned from the best, Daddy. You taught me that families protect each other, no matter what." As David turned off the lights and settled into his evening routine, he reflected on the complete nature of his victory over the forces that had threatened his family. His enemies were destroyed, his daughter was thriving, and their work was protecting countless other children from similar trauma. But most importantly, David had learned that true strength came not from professional success or financial achievement, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect the people who mattered most. David Finley had discovered that he was capable of being far more dangerous than anyone had imagined when his child was threatened, and he had used that capacity to create a legacy of protection that would endure long after his enemies were forgotten. The basement door had revealed the worst of human evil, but it had also revealed the best of parental love and determination. And in the end, love and determination had proven far more powerful than greed, manipulation, and cruelty. Emma was safe, justice had been served, and David's work would continue protecting children for generations to come. The game was over, and David had won completely, not just for his family, but for every child who would never have to face the kind of evil that had once threatened to destroy everything he held dear. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. To our wonderful community at Infidelity Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence keeps us motivated. Quick question, what part of the globe are you tuning in from? Whether it's morning or night where you are, let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Mask of Normalcy. Russell Norwood was not a man who tolerated deception. In the high-stakes world of private equity where he'd made his fortune, he developed a reputation for brutal efficiency and an almost supernatural ability to detect lies. His colleagues called him the bloodhound behind his back, a nickname he secretly enjoyed. At 42, Russell had everything most men dreamed of: a sprawling colonial home in an exclusive neighborhood, a portfolio worth 8 figures, and what he had believed to be a loving wife of 7 years. Vanessa had been a paralegal when they met, intelligent and ambitious with a sharp wit that had drawn him in immediately. "You know what I find refreshing about you, Russell," she had said on their third date, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. "You don't pretend to be nice." He'd laughed then. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "Absolutely," she'd replied with that enigmatic smile. "Nice is boring. Nice is predictable. You're authentic." That conversation had sealed their fate. 6 months later, they were married in a lavish ceremony that made the society pages. Russell remembered how Dorothy, Vanessa's mother, had watched him throughout the reception with thinly veiled suspicion. She'd cornered him by the bar, her diamonds catching the light as she leaned in close. "My daughter could have had anyone," she'd whispered, her breath heavy with champagne. Just remember that. Russell had simply smiled and walked away. Dorothy Perkins was old Boston money with nothing left but the name. He knew she'd hoped Vanessa would marry into a family with lineage rather than a self-made man with new money and no pedigree. For years, the marriage had been good, or so Russell had thought. Vanessa managed their social calendar with precision while he built his firm from a boutique agency into a powerhouse. They traveled extensively, maintained the right friendships, and if they hadn't had children yet, well, they had agreed that careers came first. The first crack appeared 3 years ago when Dorothy's investment advisor ran off with most of her fortune. Rather than allow his mother-in-law to face public humiliation, Russell had quietly paid off her debts and moved her into their guest house. Vanessa had been grateful, effusively so, but something shifted after Dorothy's arrival. "You work too much," Vanessa began saying. The sex dwindled. The conversations shortened. Dorothy's presence became a constant, her influence over Vanessa growing by the day. 8 months ago, Vanessa had approached him with an idea. "Mom and I want to start a small business," she'd said over dinner. "Just crafts, really. Artisanal soaps, candles, that sort of thing. We could use the home office since you're hardly ever there." Russell had agreed, seeing it as an opportunity for Vanessa to occupy herself and perhaps loosen Dorothy's grip. He'd even helped them set up a limited liability company, Perkins Artisanal Goods, and had his accountant show them the basics of business finance. Looking back, he should have seen the signs. The late-night inventory sessions, the steady stream of packages, the new friends Vanessa never introduced him to, the hushed phone calls that ended when he entered a room. But he'd been distracted by the Harrington acquisition, a complex deal that had consumed him for months. By the time he started paying attention to what was happening in his own home, the foundation was already crumbling beneath his feet. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Russell had received a text from a block number while in a board meeting. "Your house is being watched." Not by us. There was no signature, no explanation. Just those 8 words that sent ice through his veins. Chapter 2. Beneath the Surface. The anonymous text message nagged at Russell as he left his office early, breaking his usual pattern of working until 8. He drove home with a growing sense of unease, taking a circuitous route and checking his rearview mirror frequently. Old habits from his early days when he navigated the sharky waters of venture capital with competitors watching his every move. As he approached his neighborhood, Russell pulled into the parking lot of a local coffee shop and called his head of security, Boyd Walton, a former FBI agent who now handled private contracts. "Boyd, I need surveillance on my house. Discreet, starting immediately. Problem at home, Russ?" Boyd's voice was carefully neutral. "Just a precaution. And I need you to pull records for all deliveries to my address for the past 6 months. Courier services, postal, everything. Will do. Anything else?" Russell hesitated. "Yes. I want to know who's watching my property." "Someone's watching you?" The professional neutrality in Boyd's voice slipped. "That's what I need to confirm. Give me answers by tomorrow." Russell hung up and sat in his car for several minutes, thinking. Then he called his attorney, Philip Maddox. "Phil, I need a favor off the books." "Those are getting expensive, Russell," Philip replied, but his tone was light. "I need you to prepare documentation transferring all my personal assets to the Cayman Shell. Backdated appropriately." A pause. "That sounds like you're expecting trouble. Just a contingency. And Phil, I may need you to show up unannounced. If I text you 911 home, Drop everything and come to my house with those papers. Russell, you're scaring me a little. What's going on? Hopefully nothing. But if it's something, I want to be prepared. Russell arrived home to find Vanessa and Dorothy in the kitchen, preparing dinner together. An unusual sight. They both startled when he walked in. You're home early, Vanessa said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Thought I'd surprise you. Russell kissed her cheek, noticing how she subtly pulled away. Something smells good. Coke au vin, Dorothy said, her hands fidgeting with her apron. Vanessa's been taking French cooking classes. This was news to Russell. Have you? Where? Just online, Vanessa replied quickly. Something to do while you're working. Russell nodded, watching them exchange glances. Mind if I check some emails in the office before dinner? Actually, Vanessa said, we have inventory spread out everywhere in there. It's a mess. Why don't you use the study instead? Sure. Russell smiled. No problem. He walked upstairs to the study, which overlooked the driveway, and watched as a dark sedan drove slowly past the house, then circled back and parked across the street. The windows were tinted, but he could make out the silhouette of someone watching the house. That night, after Vanessa fell asleep, Russell slipped out of bed and made his way to the home office. The door was locked, another recent change. Using the spare key he'd quietly made weeks earlier, he let himself in. The room had been transformed. What had once been his workspace now looked like a small factory. There were boxes of packaging materials, label makers, and various crafting supplies. But in the corner, partially hidden behind a folding screen, sat something that made his blood run cold. A professional-grade heat press and what appeared to be a specialized printer. Russell carefully photographed everything without disturbing the setup, then examined the labels on some of the boxes. They bore the logos of high-end designer brands: Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Prada. A drawer in the desk contained sample tags and authenticity cards that looked indistinguishable from the real thing. His wife wasn't running a craft business. She was manufacturing counterfeit designer goods. As Russell was about to leave, his phone pinged with a message from Boyd. 2 watchers. 1 FBI commercial fraud division. 1 unknown, possibly organized crime connection. Call me ASAP. Russell quietly locked the office and returned to bed, lying awake beside his sleeping wife. The pieces were falling into place, and none of them formed a picture he wanted to see. The next morning, Russell received a detailed report from Boyd. The unknown watcher was connected to the Vitali crime family, specifically to their counterfeiting operations. The delivery records showed regular packages from China and Turkey, common sources for raw materials used in counterfeiting luxury goods. And most damning of all, there were regular cash deposits into a bank account under Perkins' artisanal goods that totaled over $300,000 in the past 6 months. Russell maintained his routine, leaving for work at his usual time, but instead of going to his office, he met with Boyd and Philip at a hotel downtown. So my wife and mother-in-law are running a counterfeiting operation from my home office, Russell said flatly, staring out the window at the city skyline. And they've somehow gotten involved with the Vitali family. Philip whistled low. That's federal prison time, Russell. Trademark counterfeiting at this scale carries up to 10 years. The FBI surveillance suggests they're building a case, Boyd added. They typically observe for weeks before moving in. They're probably documenting the distribution network. Russell turned to them, his expression hardening. I need to know everything. Who they're working with, where the money's going, and most importantly, who else is involved. You think there's someone else? Philip asked. Russell's jaw tightened. Vanessa's smart, but she doesn't have the connections to set something like this up. Someone introduced her to this world. He didn't share his darkest suspicion, that his wife's sudden distance might be connected to more than just her criminal enterprise. But first, he needed proof. Boyd, I want surveillance on Vanessa when she leaves the house. And I want to know every person she meets with. Russell, Philip said cautiously, what exactly are you planning? Russell's face was a mask of cold determination. I'm planning to find out who's trying to set me up to take the fall. And then I'm going to make sure they regret it. Chapter 3. The Setup. Russell spent the next 3 days maintaining the illusion of normalcy while gathering intelligence. Boyd's team followed Vanessa to a series of meetings, including one with a man identified as Maxwell Lobo Wallace, a mid-level operative in the Vitali organization who specialized in distribution of counterfeit goods. More troubling was her meeting with a man Boyd couldn't immediately identify. Tall, well-dressed, driving a Maserati. They met at an upscale hotel bar in the financial district and, based on the surveillance photos, seemed intimately familiar with each other. "Got a name for our mystery man," Boyd said, calling Russell while he was at lunch with clients. "Anthony Keller. Goes by Tony. Former customs officer. Now works as a consultant for import businesses. Has connections to both legitimate luxury retailers and the black market." "And his connection to my wife?" Russell asked, keeping his voice neutral despite the growing knot in his stomach. Boyd hesitated. They checked into the hotel, Russell. Room was booked for 3 hours. Russell absorbed this information with a cold detachment that surprised even him. "I see. Keep following the thread." That evening at home, Russell watched Vanessa move around the kitchen, noting how she checked her phone every few minutes. She seemed on edge, jumpy. "Everything okay?" he asked, sipping his bourbon. "You seem distracted." "Just busy with the business," she said, not meeting his eyes. "We have a big order to fulfill this week. Anything I can help with?" She looked up sharply. "No. You have your work, I have mine." "Fair enough." He paused. "How about we go away this weekend? We haven't had time alone in months." "I can't," she said quickly. "Mom and I have a craft fair in Providence." Russell nodded, knowing there was no craft fair. According to Boyd, she had a meeting scheduled with Lobo Wallace to hand off a major shipment. Another time, then. That night, Russell received a text from an unknown number. "Walk away from the heart deal, or your wife's activities become your problem." The heart deal was a sensitive acquisition Russell's firm was managing, a pharmaceutical company with promising patents. The threat confirmed his suspicion. Someone was using Vanessa's counterfeiting operation as leverage against him. The next morning, Russell kissed Vanessa goodbye, as usual, but instead of heading to work, he met with a former colleague who now worked for the DEA. "I need to know if the FBI is planning to move on a counterfeiting operation," Russell explained, keeping details vague. "It's related to the Hart acquisition." His contact made some calls. "Word is they're moving tomorrow morning. Commercial Fraud Division, with support from local PD." Russell thanked him and immediately called Philip. "Tomorrow's the day. Be ready." He spent the rest of the day preparing, transferring funds to secure accounts, and ensuring his contingency plans were in place. That evening, he made a show of telling Vanessa he had an early meeting the next day. "I'll be gone before you're up," he said casually. "That's fine," she replied, distracted by her phone. "Mom and I have a lot of work to do anyway." Russell pretended to go to sleep early, but instead lay awake, listening as Vanessa slipped out of bed around midnight and went downstairs. He heard muffled conversation, then the sound of Dorothy's voice growing more heated. They were arguing about something. Morning came, and Russell left as promised but parked 2 blocks away, watching his house through binoculars. At precisely 8:47 a.m., 4 unmarked cars and 2 police cruisers converged on his property. He waited until the officers had entered before driving back and pulling into his driveway. As he stepped out of his car, he saw exactly what he'd expected: officers carrying boxes of counterfeit goods out of his home office. What he hadn't expected was the look of rehearsed terror on Vanessa's face as she spotted him. She immediately pointed in his direction. "He made me do it," she cried out, her voice carrying across the lawn. "Russell forced us to run the operation. He threatened us." Dorothy stood beside her, nodding dramatically, wiping obviously fake tears from her eyes. "He said he'd cut us off completely if we didn't help him," she added, her voice breaking. We were terrified. A detective approached Russell. "Sir, I'm Detective Cooper with Boston PD. We have a warrant to search these premises for counterfeit goods and related materials." "Understand," Russell said calmly. "But I can assure you, Detective, this is the first I'm hearing about any counterfeiting operation in my home." "That's a lie," Vanessa shouted. "He coordinated everything. The suppliers, the distribution, it was all him." Detective Cooper gave Russell a hard look. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me for questioning." As the detective reached for his handcuffs, A sleek black Audi pulled into the driveway, and Philip Maddox emerged, carrying a leather briefcase. "Detective Cooper," Philip called out, striding confidently toward them. "Philip Maddox, attorney for Mr. Norwood. I must insist you release my client immediately." Cooper frowned. "Your client is implicated in a federal counterfeiting operation, counselor. Is he?" Philip opened his briefcase and removed a file. "Then perhaps you can explain why Mr. Norwood has been in Zurich for the past 3 months, overseeing the European expansion of his firm. I have his passport, stamped entry and exit records, hotel receipts, and sworn statements from his business associates confirming his presence at daily meetings." Russell watched as Vanessa's face drained of color. Dorothy grabbed her daughter's arm for support. "Furthermore," Philip continued, "I have here documentation showing that Mr. Norwood transferred ownership of this property to his wife 6 months ago, retaining only minimal visitation rights during his brief returns to the States. He has had no access to or control over the home office where these alleged counterfeit goods were manufactured." Cooper examined the documents, his expression shifting from certainty to doubt. "These appear to be in order, but we'll need to verify their authenticity." "Of course," Philip agreed smoothly. "In the meantime, unless you have evidence directly linking Mr. Norwood to these activities, evidence that would somehow contradict these legal documents and multiple witness statements, I suggest you focus your investigation elsewhere." Cooper conferred with another officer, then reluctantly nodded. "Mr. Norwood, you're free to go for now, but don't leave town. We may have additional questions." As the officers continued their work, Russell turned to face Vanessa and Dorothy. His wife's expression had transformed from fake terror to genuine fear. "Russell," she began, her voice shaking, "I can't explain." "Save it." He cut her off, his voice low and controlled. "We both know what you try to do." Dorothy stepped forward, her previous tears now completely dry. "Now, Russell, don't be hasty. This is all a misunderstanding. Is it, Dorothy?" Russell's smile was glacial. "I think it's perfectly clear. The only misunderstanding was mine, believing you two had any loyalty or decency." He turned to Philip. "I'd like to go now." As they walked to Philip's car, Russell heard Vanessa call his name, a note of desperation in her voice. He didn't look back. "That went exactly as you predicted," Philip said once they were driving away. "But you know they'll challenge those documents eventually. They're good forgeries, but they won't hold up to serious scrutiny." "They don't need to," Russell replied, watching his house recede in the side mirror. "They just need to buy me time." "Time for what?" Russell's expression hardened. "Time to dismantle their entire operation and everyone connected to it, starting with Anthony Keller." Chapter 4: The Spider's Web. Russell established a command center in a penthouse suite at the Archer Hotel, paid for in cash under a different name. The room's dining table disappeared beneath laptops, financial records, and surveillance photos. Boyd had expanded his team to include a forensic accountant, a digital security expert, and 2 more field operatives. "Your wife's been busy," the accountant, a severe woman named Diana, explained as she walked Russell through the financial trail. The counterfeiting operation grossed nearly $2 million in the past year, with money moving through 6 different shell companies before landing in offshore accounts. Russell studied the diagram she'd created. "Those aren't Vanessa's accounts. She doesn't have the expertise to set this up." "Correct," Diana confirmed. "The beneficial owner appears to be Anthony Keller, though he's well insulated." Russell stared at the photo of Keller, handsome in a polished, artificial way, pinned to the evidence board. The man who'd been sleeping with his wife while using her to run his counterfeiting operation. The man who'd apparently decided Russell would make a convenient fall guy when the operation got too hot. "What's Keller's endgame?" Russell asked. "Using my wife to manufacture counterfeits is one thing, but why try to frame me specifically?" Boyd handed him a folder. "We think it's connected to this." Inside was information about the Hart Pharmaceuticals acquisition that Russell's firm was managing. Hart had developed a promising new treatment for pancreatic cancer, and their patents alone were worth billions. "Keller has connections to Meridian Biotech," Boyd explained. "They're Hart's main competitor, and they've been trying to block the acquisition." The pieces clicked into place. So Keller was working two angles, Russell mused. Using my home for his counterfeiting operation while pressuring me to drop the hard deal. Well, I didn't back off. He decided to eliminate you as a problem, Boyd finished. Russell's phone chimed with a text from Philip. Vanessa and Dorothy released pending further investigation. No charges filed yet. They're looking for you. Let them look, Russell muttered. Over the next few days, Russell immersed himself in understanding every aspect of Keller's operation. The man had constructed an impressive network. As a former customs officer, Keller had inside knowledge of how shipments were inspected and which officials could be bribed. He used that expertise to build a counterfeiting empire, importing raw materials and distributing finished products through a web of seemingly legitimate businesses. Vanessa's role had been ideal. A wealthy, respectable woman with no criminal record, whose husband's reputation and resources provided perfect cover. Dorothy, it turned out, had been the connection. Before her financial troubles, she dated a man connected to the Vitali family who had introduced her to Keller. The most disturbing discovery came when Boyd's digital expert, a former NSA contractor named Ellis, recovered deleted text from a cloud backup of Vanessa's phone. It's all arranged. Vanessa had written to Keller 3 months earlier. The FBI will find everything they need to connect Russell to the operation. Once he's arrested, I'll file for divorce, citing criminal activity, and take half of everything. Keller's response. And once the Hart deal collapses, Meridian stock will soar. We'll make millions on our options. Russell read the exchange multiple times, his expression unchanging. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. They've been planning this for months. There's more, Ellis said uncomfortably. The personal messages between them, they've been involved for over a year. Russell nodded, unsurprised. Show me everything. Ellis hesitated, then brought up a series of exchanges that left no doubt about the nature of Vanessa and Keller's relationship. Messages about their future together, about how Russell was too absorbed in his work to notice what was happening under his nose, about their plans for after his downfall. I almost feel bad for him, Vanessa had written. He trusted me completely. Don't waste sympathy, Keller had replied. He's collateral damage. Besides, he'll still have his reputation when we're done. Just not his fortune or his freedom. Russell's face betrayed nothing as he read their intimate exchanges, their cruel jokes at his expense, their detailed plans for his destruction. When he finished, he closed the laptop and stood up. I think we have everything we need, he said calmly. That night, alone in the hotel bedroom, Russell finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of Vanessa's betrayal. He'd given her everything, his name, his trust, his protection when her mother needed it. In return, she'd plotted his ruin while sharing another man's bed. For the first time since this began, Russell felt a white-hot rage building inside him. But by morning, that rage had cooled into something far more dangerous, absolute resolve. When Boyd arrived the next morning, he found Russell dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, reviewing documents with methodical precision. You okay? Boyd asked. Russell looked up, his eyes clear and focused. I've never been better. Today we start dismantling Anthony Keller's life piece by piece. The FBI will move on him eventually, Boyd pointed out, once they finish processing the evidence from your house. The FBI moves too slowly, Russell interrupted, and they're constrained by laws and procedures. I'm not. Boyd studied him carefully. What exactly are you planning, Russell? Russell gestured to the whiteboard where he'd outlined a comprehensive strategy. First, we cut off his money, then his connections, then his protection. By the time I'm finished, Anthony Keller will have nothing and no one. And Vanessa? Boyd asked quietly. A cold smile touched Russell's lips. My wife made her choice. She'll learn what that choice costs. Chapter 5. Threads of Deception. Russell's first target was Keller's financial foundation. Through Diana's analysis, they identified the main revenue streams from the counterfeiting operation and the legitimate businesses Keller used as fronts. Chief among these was a high-end import company called Lux Verified, which supposedly authenticated luxury goods, but actually served as the primary distribution channel for the counterfeits. Keller owns 60% of Lux through a shell company, Diana explained. The remaining 40% is split between 3 silent partners. Their client list includes some major department stores and online retailers who believe they're getting genuine, authenticated goods. Russell studied the company structure. Who's the most vulnerable partner? Diana pointed to a name, Andrea Moretti. She provided initial capital, but isn't involved in operations. Her main business is real estate development. Perfect. Russell picked up his phone. Time to make a new friend. Through his extensive business network, Russell arranged an introduction to Andrea at a charity gala that weekend. She was an elegant woman in her 50s with a shrewd business mind. Russell approached her with a real estate opportunity, a distressed shopping center his firm had acquired in a portfolio liquidation. "I've heard you work wonders with retail spaces," he said, after establishing rapport. "This property has potential, but it needs the right vision." Andrea was intrigued, and they arranged to meet for lunch the following week. Over the next few days, Russell had Boyd's team assemble a comprehensive file on Lux Verified's actual operations, complete with documentation showing how the company was distributing counterfeits to unsuspecting retailers. At lunch, Russell waited until after their business discussion before casually mentioning, "I understand you're an investor in Lux Verified." Andrea nodded, sipping her wine. "A small stake. Anthony Keller manages most of it." "Do you know Anthony?" "Not personally," Russell replied, "but I've been learning a great deal about his operation recently." He slid a folder across the table. Andrea opened it, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock to alarm as she paged through the contents. "This can't be right," she whispered. "Every document in that file is authentic," Russell assured her. "Lux is selling counterfeits to legitimate retailers. When this breaks, and it will break, everyone involved faces federal charges and civil lawsuits that will run into the millions." Andrea's face had gone pale. "What do you want?" "Two things. First, sell your stake in Lux to my holding company for $1, effective immediately. Second, introduce me to the other partners as someone interested in investing." "Why would you want it on a business that's about to collapse?" Russell smiled thinly. "Let me worry about that. Do we have a deal, or would you prefer I take this information to the FBI?" By the end of the week, Russell owned 40% of Lux Verified and had meetings scheduled with the remaining partners. Each received the same evidence and the same offer. By the following Friday, Russell controlled 100% of Keller's primary distribution channel without Keller knowing anything had changed. Simultaneously, Russell moved against Keller's relationship with the Vitali crime family. Through Boyd's connections, he arranged a meeting with Riccardo Vitali, the family's consigliere, at a secluded restaurant in the North End. Vitali was a thin, elegant man who looked more like an accountant than a mobster. He listened impassively as Russell laid out everything he knew about Keller's operation, including evidence that Keller was skimming profits that should have gone to the Vitali family. "Mr. Keller has been using my home and my wife for his operation," Russell explained. "He attempted to frame me when things got hot. I have no quarrel with your family, but I thought you should know exactly who you're dealing with." Vitali studied Russell with calculating eyes. "Why come to me with this? You could go to the feds. The feds would shut down the entire operation. I'm only interested in Keller. Once he's removed, I believe we could establish a more equitable arrangement." "You're proposing to take over Keller's position?" Vitali seemed amused. "I'm proposing a clean transition with better returns and less risk," Russell corrected. "My network and resources far exceed Keller's. You'd find me a more valuable partner." Vitali leaned back. "This is the man who's sleeping with your wife?" "Yes. And you want to do business with us?" "Business is business," Russell replied coldly. "Personal matters are separate." "Not in my experience," Vitali said, "but I appreciate your directness. I'll consider what you shared." Russell knew the seed had been planted. The Vitales wouldn't tolerate theft, and they'd be watching Keller closely now. One more pressure point applied. The third prong of Russell's attack targeted Keller's relationship with Meridian Biotech. Through careful manipulation of trading records and a series of anonymous tips to financial journalists, Russell created a paper trail suggesting Keller was engaged in insider trading related to the Hart acquisition. By the end of the second week, Keller's world was beginning to unravel. though he didn't yet realize the source. Lux Verified's operations were mysteriously disrupted by shipment problems and customs delays. His Vitali family contacts became suddenly distant, and a Wall Street Journal reporter started asking uncomfortable questions about his connection to Meridian Biotech. Throughout this period, Russell maintained complete radio silence with Vanessa, though he knew she was trying desperately to reach him. She'd left dozens of messages, each more frantic than the last, cycling through explanations, excuses, and finally threats. "You can't just disappear," her latest voicemail said. "We need to talk about what happens next. I've spoken to a divorce attorney. If you don't respond, I'll have no choice but to proceed with a filing that includes all your business irregularities." Russell played this message for Philip, who shook his head. "She's bluffing. She knows any investigation would uncover her own activities." "She's panicking," Russell corrected. "Keller's feeling the pressure, which means she is too." Boyd entered with fresh surveillance photos. "Keller met with Vanessa today. It didn't look friendly." The photos showed Keller and Vanessa in his car, clearly arguing. In the final image, Vanessa was crying as Keller gripped her arm. Russell studied the photos dispassionately. He's realizing she's a liability now. Everything's proceeding exactly as planned. Philip looked concerned. "Russell, I understand your anger, but Vanessa could be in actual danger if Keller thinks she's a threat." "Then she should have chosen her partners more carefully," Russell replied without emotion. Now it's time for Phase 2. Chapter 6, The Architect's Blueprint. 3 weeks after the police raid, Russell finally reached out to Vanessa via text. "We need to talk. Archer Hotel, Suite 1506, tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone." When Vanessa arrived at the hotel suite, she found Russell sitting calmly at the dining table, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, looking as though their world hadn't imploded. The room was minimalist, but clearly expensive. "Russell," she breathed, relief evident in her voice. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "Have a seat, Vanessa." His tone was professionally courteous, as if addressing a business associate rather than his wife. She hesitated, then sat across from him. She looked thinner than he remembered, dark circles under her eyes, her usual impeccable appearance slightly frayed at the edges. "Where have you been?" she asked. "The police have been looking for you to ask more questions." "Have they?" Russell raised an eyebrow. "Strange that they haven't found me, considering I haven't left Boston." Vanessa fidgeted with her wedding ring. "Russell, about what happened?" "I can explain. It wasn't what it looked like." "Really?" Russell slid a folder across the table. "Because it looked like you were running a counterfeiting operation from our home while having an affair with Anthony Keller and plotting to frame me for federal crimes." Vanessa's face drained of color as she opened the folder to find printouts of her text exchanges with Keller. "How did you—" "That's not important," Russell interrupted. "What matters is that I know everything, Vanessa. Every detail of your relationship with Keller, every step of your plan to destroy me, every dollar you expected to gain from my downfall." Tears welled in her eyes. "It wasn't my idea. Tony convinced me that you were going to leave me anyway. He said you had other women, that you were just waiting for the right time to cut me loose." Russell laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "And you believed him? After 7 years of marriage, you took the word of a con man over mine. You were never home." Vanessa's voice rose. "Always working, always distracted. Tony made me feel special, wanted—" "While plotting to send me to prison," Russell added flatly. "How romantic." Vanessa wiped away tears. "What do you want, Russell? Is this just to humiliate me before you file for divorce?" Russell leaned forward, his expression suddenly intense. "I want you to understand exactly what's happening. Right now, Anthony Keller's life is collapsing around him. His business partners have abandoned him. His criminal associates suspect him of theft. Federal investigators are circling, and he believes you're the weak link." Fear flickered across Vanessa's face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm dismantling everything Keller built," Russell explained calmly. "Piece by piece, connection by connection. And I've made sure he'll believe you're responsible." "That's insane," Vanessa whispered. "He'll come after you?" Russell finished. "Yes, I expect he will. Unless..." "Unless what?" unless you help me complete his destruction. Russell outlined his proposition. Vanessa would return to Keller, claiming she'd met with Russell only to try to extract information about his legal strategy. She would become Russell's eyes and ears, feeding him information while subtly encouraging Keller's growing paranoia. Why would I do this? Vanessa asked, her voice shaking. If Tony is as dangerous as you say. Because it's your only option, Russell said simply. The FBI has enough evidence to charge you both with multiple federal crimes. I'm the only thing standing between you and a lengthy prison sentence. You wouldn't, she challenged, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Russell slid another folder across the table. Wouldn't I? This contains every piece of evidence linking you directly to the counterfeiting operation. One call from me, and a U.S. attorney gets a copy. Vanessa stared at him, seeing a side of her husband she'd never encountered before, calculated, ruthless, and completely unmoved by her tears. What about Dorothy? She asked finally. Your mother is already cooperating, Russell replied. She made her deal 2 days ago. This was a lie. Russell hadn't contacted Dorothy at all, but the shock and betrayal on Vanessa's face told him she believed it. The seed of doubt had been planted. Now mother and daughter would distrust each other as well. I need time to think, Vanessa said. You have until tomorrow morning, Russell replied, standing to indicate the meeting was over. 10 a.m. Yes or no? After that, I call the FBI. After Vanessa left, Boyd emerged from the bedroom where he'd been monitoring the conversation. She'll run straight to Keller, he predicted. Of course she will, Russell agreed. And she'll tell him exactly what I want him to hear, that I'm gathering evidence against him, that I have connections in federal law enforcement, that I'm coming for him. You're using your wife as bait, Boyd observed, not judgmentally, but with professional assessment. She made herself bait when she decided to betray me, Russell replied. I'm just ensuring she serves a purpose. That evening, Russell met with Philip to discuss the legal aspects of his plan. The attorney was concerned. What you're doing borders on witness tampering and obstruction of justice, Philip warned. Not to mention the potential for getting Vanessa seriously hurt. I'm not forcing her to do anything, Russell countered. She has choices. Bad ones, admittedly, but choices nonetheless. Philip sighed. And what's your endgame here? What happens when Keller realizes he's being set up? Russell's expression was chillingly calm. Then he'll do exactly what cornered rats always do, something desperate and stupid. And when he does, I'll be waiting. The next morning, precisely at 10 a.m., Vanessa texted Russell, I'll do it. But I want immunity in writing. Russell smiled as he typed his response. Meet me at Philip's office at noon. Come alone. If Keller follows you, the deal is off. Everything was falling into place. The trap was set. Now all Russell had to do was wait for his targets to spring at themselves. Chapter 7. Checkmate in motion. The chess pieces were moving exactly as Russell had anticipated. Vanessa, torn between fear of Keller and fear of prosecution, became his reluctant informant. Dorothy, isolated and suspicious after Russell's lie about her cooperation, retreated to a friend's house in Wellesley. And Keller, feeling the walls closing in, grew increasingly erratic. Russell maintained his command center at the Archer, monitoring developments through Boyd's surveillance team and Diana's financial tracking. The hard acquisition proceeded on schedule despite Meridian Biotech's desperate attempts to derail it. Russell attended board meetings and client presentations as if nothing in his personal life had imploded, projecting an aura of unflappable control that unnerved even his closest colleagues. The SEC has opened an investigation into Keller's trading activity, Philip reported, joining Russell for their daily briefing. Anonymous tips about his Meridian connections have caught their attention. Russell nodded, satisfied. In the Lux-verified situation, the new CEO you installed has been reviewing their authentication procedures, Boyd explained. Found shocking irregularities that necessitated contacting all their retail clients. Keller's been trying to get through to him for days, but mysteriously, his calls aren't being returned. The new CEO was Russell's former head of operations, a loyal employee who understood exactly what Russell wanted, a controlled implosion that would destroy Keller's credibility without bringing down the entire business. Vanessa reports that Keller's becoming unhinged, Boyd continued, checking his notes. Drinking heavily, lashing out. He's convinced someone's targeting him specifically, but can't figure out who. Has he threatened her? Russell asked, his tone clinically detached. Boyd hesitated. She says no, but the surveillance tells a different story. He grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises during their last meeting. Good, Russell said coldly. Document everything. We'll need it later. Philip exchanged concerned glances with Boyd. Russell, I understand your anger, but using your wife as a punching bag for Keller crosses a line. She crossed the line first, Russell replied without emotion. Besides, I'm not forcing her to stay with him. She's making that choice because she thinks it's her best option. And what happens when Keller snaps completely? Philip pressed. He has connections to violent criminals. This could escalate beyond your control. Russell smiled thinly. That's exactly what I'm counting on. The next phase of Russell's plan targeted the fragile alliance between Keller and the Vitali family. Using information obtained from Vanessa, Russell identified a warehouse in South Boston where a major shipment of counterfeit goods was being stored. Through an untraceable burner phone, he contacted Ricardo Vitali. Warehouse 17 on Dorchester Avenue. Tonight, Keller's moving the merchandise without your knowledge, bringing in his own people. Within hours, surveillance showed Vitali family soldiers converging on the warehouse. The resulting confrontation with Keller's men escalated into violence that required police intervention. 3 arrests were made, none of them Vitali associates, who had vanished before authorities arrived. Russell watched the news coverage with satisfaction. The incident would be the final nail in Keller's relationship with the Vitali family, who prized discretion above all. The following day, Vanessa called Russell in a panic. Tony knows, she said, her voice trembling. He knows I've been feeding you information. He found a burner phone you gave me. Where are you now? Russell asked calmly. In the bathroom at his condo. He's in the other room, talking to someone on the phone. Russell, he's saying he's going to make an example of me. I think he's going to hurt me. Stay calm, Russell instructed. Is there a window in the bathroom? Yes, but it's small and we're on the 5th floor. Lock the door. Tell him you're taking a shower. Then text me his exact address. I'll have someone there in 10 minutes. After hanging up, Russell turned to Boyd. Send Martinez to extract her. Then leak Keller's address to Detective Cooper. Anonymous tip about counterfeit goods. Boyd frowned. You're saving her? I'm ensuring she remains useful, Russell corrected, and creating the perfect opportunity to deliver Keller to the authorities. 30 minutes later, Boyd received confirmation that Martinez had successfully extracted Vanessa through the bathroom window using equipment from his former SWAT days. She was being brought to a safe house, shaken but unharmed. Meanwhile, Boston PD was surrounding Keller's building based on the anonymous tip. The timing couldn't have been better. Keller's rage at Vanessa's betrayal had led him to pull out his entire inventory of counterfeit samples and authentication materials, which were spread across his dining room table when police knocked on his door. Russell watched the feed from a traffic camera across from Keller's building, satisfaction coursing through him as he saw Keller being led out in handcuffs. Now what? Philip asked. Now we move to the final phase, Russell replied, ensuring none of them ever recover from this. When Vanessa arrived at the safe house, Russell was waiting. She looked terrible, makeup smeared, hair disheveled, a bruise forming on her cheek where Keller had struck her. You set me up, she accused, her voice hoarse from crying. You knew he'd figure it out. I anticipated it as a possibility, Russell acknowledged without remorse. But you're alive, and Keller is in custody. That's what matters. What matters? Vanessa laughed bitterly. My life is destroyed. I could go to prison. I have nothing left. That's not entirely true, Russell said, sliding a document across the table. This is a one-way ticket to Barcelona, a new passport in the name of Victoria Peters, and access to an account with enough money to start over. The account will be funded after you sign these papers. The papers were divorce documents, devastatingly one-sided. Vanessa would relinquish all claims to Russell's assets and business interests. She would admit to the counterfeiting operation and her affair in writing. She would agree never to contact Russell again or to return to the United States. This is blackmail, she whispered. This is mercy, Russell corrected. You could be facing federal charges carrying up to 20 years. Instead, you get a new life far away from here. All you have to do is sign. Vanessa stared at the documents, then at her husband, this cold stranger who had once loved her. Was any of it real? She asked quietly. I mean. For a moment, something flickered in Russell's eyes, a ghost of the man he'd been before her betrayal. Then it vanished, replaced by implacable resolve. It doesn't matter now, he said. Sign the papers, Vanessa. It's your only way out. With a shaking hand, she signed each page. When she finished, Russell collected the documents without another word and walked to the door. Russell, she called after him. Will I ever see you again? He paused, his back to her. If you do, it means you've broken our agreement. And trust me, Vanessa, you don't want to find out what happens then. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Anthony Keller sat in an interrogation room at Boston Police Headquarters, his designer suit rumpled, his confident facade cracking. Across from him, Detective Cooper reviewed the evidence gathered from Keller's condo, samples of counterfeit goods, authentication materials, and financial records linking him to the distribution network. You're looking at multiple federal charges, Cooper explained. Trademark counterfeiting, conspiracy, interstate transport of stolen property. The U.S. Attorney's Office is talking about a 15-year minimum sentence. Keller leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. Look, I can give you bigger fish. The Vitali family's entire operation. Names, dates, everything. We're listening, Cooper said, though his expression suggested skepticism. First, I want a deal in writing. Reduced charges, witness protection. Cooper nodded to his partner, who left the room, presumably to consult with prosecutors. In reality, he wanted to make a call that would ensure word of Keller's offer reached Ricardo Vitali within the hour. Across town, Russell met with the board of Lux Verified, now fully under his control. The company's legitimate business, authenticating luxury goods, would continue under new management with enhanced procedures. The counterfeiting operation had been surgically excised, with all evidence pointing solely to Keller. The company's reputation will take a hit initially, Russell acknowledged to the board members, all recently installed allies. But we'll position it as a necessary cleansing after discovering Keller's deception. Within 6 months, Lux will be the gold standard for authentication because we'll have proven our commitment to integrity. As Russell left the meeting, Boyd called with an update. Keller's trying to flip on the Vitalis. Word's already spreading in their organization. Perfect, Russell replied. And Dorothy? Still at her friend's house in Wellesley. She's been calling Vanessa nonstop since yesterday, but obviously getting no response. It's time to bring her in, Russell decided. Have Martinez pick her up. Use whatever story works. Dorothy Perkins arrived at the safe house 2 hours later, escorted by Martinez, who had convinced her that Vanessa was in trouble and needed her mother. Instead, she found Russell waiting in a sparsely furnished living room. Where's Vanessa? She demanded, her imperious manner intact despite the circumstances. Gone, Russell replied simply. And if she's smart, she won't come back. Dorothy's face paled. What have you done? What have I done? Russell laughed without humor. That's rich coming from the woman who helped set me up to take the fall for a federal crime. It wasn't my idea, Dorothy protested quickly. Tony Keller approached me after my investment troubles. He said it would be easy money, just using the home office when you weren't around. Then it escalated to framing me for everything while your daughter slept with him. Russell finished coldly. Yes, I'm aware of how it escalated. Dorothy sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 67 years. What happens now? Are you going to turn me in? Russell studied his mother-in-law, this woman who had looked down on him from the moment they met, who had never thought him good enough for her daughter despite his success and generosity. That depends entirely on you, Dorothy, he said finally. I'm prepared to offer you the same deal Vanessa took, a new identity, enough money to live comfortably far away from here, in exchange for signing some papers and disappearing permanently. And if I refuse? Russell slid a folder across the coffee table. Then these documents go to the FBI. They detail your involvement from the beginning, including your prior knowledge of the counterfeiting operation, your introduction of Keller to Vanessa, and your role in planning to frame me. Dorothy opened the folder with trembling hands. These are lies, she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her. Are they? Russell raised an eyebrow. Vanessa has already provided a sworn statement implicating you as the mastermind. It's her word against yours. Who do you think they'll believe? The daughter who fled the country, or the mother who stayed behind to collect the spoils? It was another lie. Vanessa had signed no such statement, but Dorothy had no way of knowing that. The seed of betrayal Russell had planted earlier bloomed into full certainty in Dorothy's mind. Her own daughter had sacrificed her to save herself. You're a monster, Dorothy said, but there was no conviction in her voice. I'm a survivor, Russell corrected. Something you taught me to be, ironically enough. Now, do we have a deal? The next day, Dorothy boarded a flight to Amsterdam with a new passport in the name of Elizabeth Reynolds. The lakeside cottage she'd always dreamed of owning would be waiting for her, comfortable but modest, far from the luxury she'd once known. She would never see her daughter again. Meanwhile, Anthony Keller's situation deteriorated rapidly. His attempt to trade information on the Vitali family earned him protective custody, but also a target on his back. 2 guards at the holding facility were on Riccardo Vitali's payroll, and word of Keller's cooperation spread quickly through the criminal underworld. Prosecutors, eager to build a case against the Vitali organization, moved Keller to a secure location to finalize his cooperation agreement. The transport van never arrived at its destination. It was found abandoned on a service road, the 2 U.S. Marshals unconscious from drug coffee, Keller nowhere to be found. 3 days later, Keller's body washed up on the shores of Boston Harbor, bearing the hallmarks of a thorough interrogation before death. The message was clear to anyone else who might consider betraying the Vitali family. Russell received the news with quiet satisfaction. Everything had unfolded according to his design. Keller had been eliminated by the very criminals he'd partnered with. Vanessa and Dorothy were exiled, never to return. The hard acquisition had closed successfully, generating millions in fees for Russell's firm. And Lux Verified, now under his control, was being repositioned as an industry leader in authenticating luxury goods. As Russell sat in his office reviewing the final reports, Philip entered with a concerned expression. It's over, Russell, he said quietly. You've won. Completely and utterly. Yes, Russell agreed, his face betraying no emotion. Justice has been served. Philip sat across from him. Has it? Or is this just revenge? Is there a difference? Russell asked mildly. I think you know there is, Philip replied. Justice restores. Revenge destroys. And I'm worried about what this has done to you. Russell considered this. They try to take everything from me, Philip, my freedom, my reputation, my company. They would have watched me go to prison without a moment's remorse. And now they've lost everything instead, Philip acknowledged. But at what cost to you? The Russell I knew before this. He was tough, yes, even ruthless in business. But there was a line he wouldn't cross. That Russell died the day his wife pointed at him and said, "He made me do it," Russell replied coldly. This is who I am now. Someone who ensures his enemies don't get second chances. Philip sighed, recognizing the futility of his concern. What will you do now? Rebuild, Russell said simply. On my terms, without distractions or vulnerabilities. As Philip left, Russell turned to the window, gazing out at the Boston skyline. He felt neither triumph nor regret, only a cold certainty that he had done what was necessary. The world had shown him its true nature, and he had adapted accordingly. Never again would he allow himself to be vulnerable. Never again would he trust without verification. And never, ever would he forgive those who betrayed him. The Russell Norwood who had believed in second chances was gone. In his place stood a man who had learned the ultimate lesson. Mercy was a luxury reserved for the weak, and he had no intention of ever being weak again. Chapter 9. Ashes to Ashes. 6 months passed. Boston's brutal winter had given way to spring, but Russell Norwood remained cold as ice. His business flourished. The hard acquisition had positioned his firm as a major player in pharmaceutical mergers, attracting new clients eager to benefit from his ruthless efficiency. Lux Verified had been successfully rebranded as the industry's most rigorous authentication service, its connection to the counterfeiting scandal minimized to a footnote about previous management. Russell had sold the colonial home where he had lived with Vanessa, unwilling to remain in a space tainted by betrayal. His new penthouse in a downtown high-rise offered panoramic views of the city and absolute privacy. The interior was minimalist, almost austere. No photographs, no mementos, nothing personal. It was less a home than a fortress. On a warm May evening, Russell sat on his balcony reviewing quarterly projections when his private line rang. Only 5 people had this number, and none called without good reason. Nor would, he answered. It's Boyd. We have a situation. Vanessa's back in Boston. Russell's expression didn't change, but his grip on the phone tightened. Explain. She flew in yesterday under her Victoria Peters identity. She's staying at the Mandarin Oriental. From what we can gather, she's nearly out of money. That's impossible, Russell said coldly. The account I set up had enough to last years if managed properly. Apparently, she wasn't careful. Also, she's not alone. She has a child with her. A boy, approximately 4 months old. Russell closed his eyes briefly, processing this information. Monitor her movements. No contact. I'll handle this personally. He hung up and walked to his desk, opening a drawer that contained a single file, the complete dossier on Vanessa's new identity. Every detail of her exile had been meticulously planned, including the establishment of an offshore account that would provide a comfortable living in Barcelona. If she had exhausted those funds in just 6 months, she had been catastrophically irresponsible. The child complicated matters. Given the timing, it could only be Keller's. Russell felt no emotional response to this revelation, just another variable to be managed. The next morning, Russell had Boyd book him a suite at the Mandarin Oriental, 2 floors above Vanessa's room. He checked in under a false name and waited for Boyd's team to report on her routine. According to their surveillance, she left the hotel every morning, visiting various financial institutions and law offices, returning frustrated each time. On the 3rd day, Russell decided it was time. He had Boyd call Vanessa's room, impersonating the hotel manager, requesting she come to the main restaurant to discuss an issue with her bill. When she arrived, she would find Russell waiting instead. Vanessa appeared exactly at the arranged time, the baby carrier in her hand. She looked thinner than Russell remembered, her once immaculate appearance now showing signs of strain. The confident socialite had been replaced by a woman clearly struggling to maintain appearances. She froze when she saw him, her face draining of color. "Hello, Vanessa," Russell said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please sit down. We have matters to discuss." After a moment's hesitation, she sat, placing the carrier beside her. Inside, the baby slept peacefully, unaware of the tension surrounding him. "You broke our agreement," Russell began without preamble. "The terms were explicit. You were never to return to the United States." "I had no choice," Vanessa replied, her voice low. "The money's gone. The account was emptied 3 months ago." Russell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Impossible. I set up that account myself. No one could access it but you." "Someone did," Vanessa insisted. "I woke up one morning and it was empty. Every penny gone. I tried to contact the bank, but suddenly my documentation wasn't valid anymore. It was like Victoria Peters never existed." Russell studied her carefully, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, he pulled out his phone and sent a text to Diana, instructing her to investigate the account immediately. "Even if what you're saying is true," Russell continued, "returning here violated our agreement. You know the consequences." Vanessa's eyes flashed with a spark of her old defiance. "What are you going to do, Russell? Turn me in? You'd be implicating yourself." "Don't test me, Vanessa. I promise there will be consequences if you returned, and there will be." She leaned forward. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. I've lost everything already, my home, my mother, my identity. The only thing I have left is my son, and I will do anything to protect him." The baby stirred in his carrier, making small whimpering sounds. Vanessa automatically reached to rock him, her maternal instincts momentarily superseding the confrontation. "Keller's child," Russell observed dispassionately. His name is Michael, Vanessa said, a protective edge at her voice. And yes, biologically Tony is his father, but Tony never knew about him. I found out I was pregnant after I left the country. Russell's phone vibrated with a message from Diana. Account emptied 3 months ago. Professional job. Traced to operation in Russia. More details coming. It seems you're telling the truth about the money, Russell acknowledged. The question is, what do we do now? I need help. Russell, Vanessa admitted, swallowing her pride. Just enough to start over somewhere. Not Barcelona, obviously. Somewhere I can raise Michael safely. Russell considered her request, weighing variables dispassionately. And why should I help you? After everything you did? Because despite what you've become, I don't believe you want an innocent child to suffer for his parents' mistakes. The baby was fully awake now, looking around with curious eyes. Russell found himself meeting that innocent gaze, seeing neither Vanessa nor Keller, but simply a child untainted by their crimes. After a long moment, Russell reached a decision. I'll establish a trust for the child, administered by a third party, accessible only for his education and essential needs. You will receive a modest stipend as his guardian, contingent on you remaining at least 3,000 miles from Boston. That's it, Vanessa asked, incredulous. I'm supposed to live on a modest stipend while raising a child alone? You're supposed to be grateful you're not in federal prison, Russell countered coldly. This arrangement is for the child's benefit, not yours. If you refuse, I'll walk away, and you can explain to the FBI why you're back in the country with fraudulent identification. Vanessa stared at him, searching for any hint of the man she had married. Finding none, she nodded slowly. You really meant it, didn't you? What you said that day at the safe house. You'll never forgive me. Forgiveness implies I still care enough to resent you, Russell replied. I don't. You're simply a loose end that needs tying up. As they finalized the details of the arrangement, Russell maintained his detached demeanor. The trust would be established immediately, with the first payments available within 48 hours. Enough time for Vanessa to be on a plane far away from Boston. When everything was settled, Vanessa gathered her things to leave, then paused. You know what the saddest part is, Russell? I really did love you once. Before Tony, before all of it. I wish you could believe that. Russell met her gaze with empty eyes. What you believe you felt is irrelevant. Actions define truth, not sentiments. Your actions spoke clearly. Vanessa nodded sadly. So do yours. She lifted the baby carrier. Goodbye, Russell. I hope someday you find whatever it is you're looking for. I'm not looking for anything, he replied. I've already found what matters, absolute self-reliance. After she left, Russell remained at the table, gazing out at the Boston skyline. He felt no triumph, no closure, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty that another potential threat had been neutralized. That evening, Russell sat alone in his penthouse, reviewing the final details of Vanessa's departure. She would be on a flight to Seattle the next morning, with connections to the trust already established. The child would be provided for, and Vanessa would be kept on a tight enough leash to ensure her compliance. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Few people knew his address, and none would visit unannounced. Cautiously, he checked the security camera to find Philip standing in the hallway. This is unexpected, Russell said as he opened the door. Philip entered, glancing around at the Spartan interior. Nice place. Very efficient. Why are you here, Philip? The attorney set his briefcase on the counter. Boyd told me about Vanessa. I wanted to make sure you were handling it appropriately. The situation is resolved, Russell replied flatly. She'll be gone by morning. Philip studied his client, concern evident in his expression. You know, when this all started, I understood your anger. The betrayal, the setup, anyone would want revenge. But it's been 6 months, Russell. You've won. Completely. Yet you're still what? Russell challenged. Still at war. Philip finished. Except there's no one left to fight. Russell turned away. I'm not interested in amateur psychology. Philip, it's not psychology, it's concern. I've known you for 15 years. The man standing in front of me now is just a shell of who you were. The man I was weak, Russell said dismissively. He trusted blindly. He believed in loyalty and love. Look where that got him. It got him a life, Philip countered. This, he gestured around the empty apartment. This isn't living, Russell. It's surviving. Surviving is underrated, Russell replied coldly. It means you haven't been defeated. Philip sighed, recognizing the futility of his concern. The papers for Vanessa's trust,